Hi, welcome to the SDSU Studio Series. In the midst of what is happening in the world today, we've created a series of digital conversations with Broadway professionals where we talk about the craft and the business of Broadway and how we can pass along this legacy to the next generation of musical theater artists. The SDSU Studio Series is organized by the MFA Musical Theatre Program at San Diego State. This program is one of only a handful of graduate degrees offered in the United States that offer the terminal degree in musical theater, and our graduates are acting, directing, choreographing, music directing, writing, and teaching in university positions worldwide. Our goal is to bring the professional world and the academic world together so that students of musical theater are prepared for today's job market. My name is Robert Meff. I worked as a professional conductor, music director, and orchestrator on Broadway for 22 years before moving to San Diego to become head of the MFA Musical Theatre Program. My goal is that every person who wants to be a musical theater artist is able to access what is going on in the professional world, which led me to creating this series and leads me to my guest, Carmel Dean. Welcome, Carmel.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Before we begin, I want to give some expectations of today's discussion. If you have questions, feel free to use the question and answer function built into Zoom. After my questions are completed, I will ask questions from your submissions. If you're from a university musical theater program, type the name of your school in the chat function. I would love to see who's represented today. So let's begin. Carmel Dean is a composer, arranger, music director, and pianist. Her first musical, Renaissance, was recently premiered off-Broadway, and her song cycle, Well-Behaved Women, recently premiered to 2 sold-out performances at Joe's Pub in New York City. Carmel Dean was the music director for the Broadway musical If Then, starring Idina Menzel. Other Broadway credits include Hands on a Hard Body, American Idiot, and the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. Off-Broadway credits include Everyday Rapture, Vanities, and Elegies by William Finn. Carmel is a native of Perth, Western Australia, and currently resides in New York City, although she is in Vermont right now. Welcome, Carmel.
Thanks, Rob.
So,
fun fact, Perth, Australia, and San Diego are sister cities.
I had no idea.
Isn't that great?
That is amazing. I'm gonna have to look more into that.
Yeah, so when people ask me to describe Perth, I just say it's actually like the San Diego of Australia.
Well,
Very
that's
similar.
amazing. Do they have fish tacos in Perth?
Probably not as good as the San Diego ones. But yes, we have lots of food.
So the university musical theater community is adapting to the coronavirus outbreak by migrating classes online and providing content like this interview to students and educators nationwide. So how are you coping, and how does this affect you as a composer or your career as a music director?
So I think, like everyone, the emotional roller coaster of what these last 7 weeks have been the biggest hurdle. I'm very fortunate in that I'm well, my friends and family are all healthy. So I do feel very lucky in that respect, that I'm not also having the worry of loved ones who are ill. And I pray that that is still the case. But in terms of my life right now as an artist, it really does change from day to day. And it definitely took me about a month to feel like I was able to even switch on my creative brain. I have a few little writing projects, none of which are paid, but they're all for fun, and they're all things that I've either sought out or that have come to me with short-term deadlines, which I've found to be really helpful right now. A lot of my paid work has gone away because I've been in development as music supervisor and arranger of The Notebook. We're supposed to be going to Chicago this fall, and there's a big question mark around that. No one knows when theaters are going to reopen, when Broadway is going to reopen. So, just trying to be in the moment as an artist and as a writer and as a human has been very challenging, which it has been for everyone.
It's very true. So how did you first get involved in music? And how did you know that music was even something that you wanted to do?
Well, apparently, according to my parents, I asked to have piano lessons at the age of 3. We had an upright piano in our house, and I guess I would just like toddle by it and plunk out a few notes, and I asked if I could learn how to play it. And my great aunt, my mother's aunt, was a fabulous pianist. She actually used to play for silent films back when that was a thing,
No
which I
kidding.
think is like the coolest job that no longer exists. So I had professional musicians in the family. My mom's sister was also a pianist. And so music was always a part of my life. I don't remember not playing the piano.
That's amazing. So you grew up in Australia and studied at the Western Australia Academy of Performing Arts.
Yep.
So what is the musical theater scene like in Australia? And did you go to college wanting to study music theater?
I actually didn't at first. I was a pretty late bloomer as far as musical theater is concerned. I was a real classical music nerd for most of my childhood and my high school years. It wasn't until about 11th grade that I was even in a musical. I actually switched high schools in grade 11 to a school with a great theater program. And we did a production of The Boyfriend, which incidentally also had Heath Ledger in it, because I was in the girls' school and he was in the boys' school. So I had a scene stealing moment. I had no lines because I'm a terrible actor, but I did have a scene stealing dance moment with Heath Ledger. It's my claim to fame. So I discovered that musical theater was so much fun. And right after that, one of my mentors, my high school music teacher, was very involved in a local theater company, and she took me under her wing, and I ended up assisting her as a assistant music director on Side by Side by Sondheim. And I was like, who is this Sondheim guy? I knew West Side Story, and that was about it. And I fell in love madly. I was head over heels from that moment on. So I actually, because I'd been focusing on classical piano for my whole life, basically, I started university as a classical piano major, a performance major. And it was a 4-year degree. And at the end of my second year, I'd done all of these amateur musicals. And I just thought, that's way more fun than being in a practice room by myself, practicing my scales and, my Chopin etudes and et cetera, et cetera. I just loved the collaborative nature of it. I loved using my specialized skill as a pianist to help actors and singers and dancers. And so I figured out that music directing, I don't really know how I figured it out. Well, I guess because I've been assisting my high school music teacher, I thought, well, music directing is something that I could do. And the music theater scene, to answer your first question, the music theater scene in Australia is small but mighty. And it just so happens that the #1 musical theater school in Australia, the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, otherwise known as WAPA, was in Perth, was in my hometown. And so one of the best and smartest things I ever did, and I still to this day remember walking in, asking if I could speak to the head of the music theater department, who didn't know me from a bar of soap. I was like 19. I said, look, I'm a classical piano major over at the other school around the corner. I said, but I want to be a music director. Is there anything you can do? And he was like, absolutely, transfer over to us. I'll take you under my wing. You can play for dance classes, song rep classes, performance prac. You can assist me as a music director, et cetera, et cetera. So I was so lucky, and that's one of the life lessons that I've always gone back to is if something's not there, ask around for it, because you just never know who's going to say yes and what doors will open up. So that was how I then got into the whole musical theater scene and ended up still getting my degree in classical piano, but I obviously focused a lot on musical theater and conducting and arranging, that kind of thing as well.
Right. Well, if there's a theme at all of talking with these amazing Broadway professionals over the course of the past few weeks, it is that the advice that don't wait around for someone to create an opportunity for you.
Yeah.
And that's just, I'm very curious about well, the whole concept of mentorship and how that happens. So you mentioned your high school teacher, music teacher, as a mentor, and maybe someone in college too. But can you talk about what makes a good mentor? Any certain stories that really like helped you start your way? What did your mentors give you?
Yeah, it's funny, someone asked me the other day who my mentors were, so I've been thinking about this a lot. And starting with Andrea Stimson, who was my high school music teacher, I think she saw a passion in me and a drive, and she saw that I was committed and that I worked hard, and because of that stuff, and she's also a great and gorgeous person, and a generous person, she provided me opportunities that would harness all of those things that I wouldn't have been able to find on my own. And the same is true for Dennis Follington, who's the head of the music theatre school that I went to see. And then one of my next mentors going into the professional world in Australia was the same. It was exactly the same thing. I said, look, I want to help you do this. I'd like to transcribe for you. I'll do anything. I'll sit in your rehearsals. I want to learn from you. And I think all of these people could see those qualities in me, but also, I imagine, saw themselves in me many years earlier. And I'm now at the point in my life and career where people are coming to me for mentoring, which is scary and crazy and also wonderful. And it's the same thing. I think back to where I was in my early 20s and how I would call people up. I remember calling Kim Grigsby, who's a great music director, who was like one of the only female music directors I'd ever seen on Broadway. And I asked if I could take her out to lunch and just pick her brain about the biz. So there's a generosity in these mentors who will take the time to mentor and provide opportunities for the next generation coming up. It's so important.
Well, I love that you mentioned Kim Brisby. She was the music director of Spring Awakening, for those of you, and Full Monty, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yes, I remember back when she scandalized Broadway by wearing a backless gown to conduct Full Monty.
In the New York Times.
I know, can you believe it?
Yeah.
Well, we've had some extraordinary women on the SDSU Studio Series, including Mary Mitchell Campbell and Georgia Stitt. Right. And Susan Schulman, and and they've talked about sometimes their struggles of being women, and certainly someone like Georgia Stitt has been particularly active and encouraging, particularly women musicians. I just wondered if how that's manifested. I mean, you're a little younger than certainly Susan Schulman's generation, but even Mary Mitchell and Georgia may have come into the business before you. But what has been your own struggle, and have you seen any movement on that in terms of how women are on creative teams?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen huge change in really only in the last 2 to 3 years. I started working professionally about 15 years ago. And I think, honestly, it's maybe one of my strengths that I have a naivety, or at least I did back then. It didn't really occur to me. I mean, I knew that, obviously, that Kim Grigsby was this incredible female conductor. I very rarely felt like I was in a position where I was hired because I was a woman, interestingly enough, because more recently I've had many emails, hey, we really want to hire a female music director. And I hear you're a great female music director. It's like, well, I happen to be female, but I'm the same music director that I was 15 years ago when I was also a female. So, obviously people are not meaning any offense by that at all, quite the opposite. But it is funny how we are shifting so rapidly. The pendulum is swinging in that direction. And obviously it's wonderful because there should be gender parity across the board. I take part in a lot of the Maestro events, and I'm on the advisory committee, and I just think it's the most wonderful thing that Georgia has created. There is this great awareness of the lack of women in the theater industry, and there really is a push to try to right that. Now, what's funny is that, you know, I'm so aware of it. And I'm surprised that not everyone is, because you will still see creative teams being announced where there are no women. It's like, but wait, have you not been on social media at all in the last 2? You know, you've not connected with anyone who's ever mentioned Maestro to you, or even said like, hey, let's have some diversity, ethnic or gender, just something that's not a bunch of white men on the team. No, I think, like I said, my naivety was probably a blessing in the beginning, because I just put my head down and I knew I had to be a good music director. I think it really didn't hit me until I was in the pit of If Then, which was 2014, 2015 on Broadway. And almost every night, I would have someone come down to the pit, because I was visible, I was waving my arms around. Someone would come down to the pit from the audience, either at intermission or after the show, and say, I've never seen a woman conductor before. And once I was doing that show 8 times a week for a year. Like, that's a lot of people who would come up and say that. And it occurred to me that, you know, something needed to be done about this. There is this image we have of a white man in his tux and tails conducting the orchestra. So, you know, I'm so thrilled that it's changing. And it also means that we as women have to step up and really prove ourselves too. And it's, the interesting thing is, and I think the challenging thing is, that suddenly these doors are opening for women to music direct and to step into these positions of leadership. And we haven't had time, I say we, the community hasn't had time to really shepherd these women through with enough training and with enough experience or internships. I have seen people be thrown into the deep end, things they're not quite ready to do. So that's the tricky spot that we're in right now. And I'm sort of looking at myself as someone who hopefully, I talk about this with Georgia and Mary Mitchell a lot, actually, and Lynn Schenkel, who's another incredible music director and composer, arranger, orchestrator. How do we help these young 20-year-old women who don't have the experience yet to suddenly step in and lead these Broadway orchestras, because there's a call for it. So it's a wonderful position to be in, but we also have to work really hard to make sure that the younger women are equipped with the right skills and knowledge to do the jobs.
Right. Well, Georgia talked about not only highlighting, like, as you say, a creative team having a diversity of gender parity and cultural background parity, but her big push now to encourage everyone, female and male music directors, to use female assistants.
Yeah.
You know, that, like,
That's
if
right.
you're not hiring a female assistant, that why aren't you? Like, that is the question.
That's exactly right. And that's how we all, you know, I'm sure you have a similar story of how you learned to be a musical director, and that you just took classes here, took classes there. There are very few institutions where you walk in, you get your music direction degree, walk out and know what to do, right? Not like that at all.
Yeah, I actually still don't know what to do. So
you
maybe you can
really
explain
well,
that.
Rob.
That's take it till you make it. Well, I mean, what you're saying reminds me, when you talk about being at the pit of If Then, it reminds me of something, and I may be wrong who said this, but I think it was Janine Tesori who said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And she was talking about her accepting the Tony Award. It might have been Lisa Krohn, but it was about the time when Funhouse was happening. So someone will correct me in the chats, I'm sure. But but regardless, you said it, I think it's very important that, yes, we need to dispel the idea that it's a man with white hair and tails that conducts an orchestra,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Like when Susan Schulman talked about it, one of her reviews for Sweeney Todd, and it was a complimentary review, said, gosh, it was so good, I couldn't even tell that it was a woman directing.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I don't even know what to do with that.
Well, we didn't either. She didn't either. So
Yeah. Wow.
it's
Wow.
very interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm considered myself in my own career extraordinarily lucky because I was mentored, well, you know, and close associates with three very, very strong women. You know, Kristen Blodgett, who was the music supervisor from Phantom of the Opera, and then of course Amy Rogers and Mary Mitchell Campbell.
Yeah.
Completely wonderfully strong women, and Susan Schulman for that matter. And I often think about like how my career would be different if my main mentors were all men. You know,
Yeah.
if things that might have turned out differently. You know, and the way that I approach everything is because of these people.
Yeah. Well, look, the bottom line is they're great music directors and they're great humans, as are you. So, you know, in a perfect world, this should just be what happens. Like, it doesn't matter what your gender or your background. Like, just be a good human and be good at your job and be willing to learn. But we need to widen our pool. Right now. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to go back to my written questions here for a second, because I love that we diverted there. But I'm so curious about this thing about earlier in your life. Okay, so when we last left Carmel Dean in her biography, she was in Perth and studying in college. But you were involved with the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Now, how on earth did you book that job? And how is a production like that similar or different than what you do in musical theater?
It's all going to come full circle because my second mentor that I met at WAPA, his name is Max Lambert, still a great friend to this day. He is based in Sydney. And for those who don't really know Australian geography, Perth is Perth is the San Diego of Australia, way southwest, 5-hour flight across the country from Sydney and Melbourne. Sydney and Melbourne are the big theatre cities. Perth's a tiny little city, which is why it's weird that the best music theatre school was there, but it was just serendipitous for me. So Max Lambert would come over and do master classes and work with the students. And again, I saw that he was such a smart music director and had so much experience, and I just knew I could learn from him. So I offered to help him with transcriptions, and again, can I bring you coffee or anything else that I might be able to offer? And he ended up inviting me once I graduated to move to Sydney and work as an intern, basically, on the Olympics. He was the head of the music department of the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics. And why would I not say yes to that? So, you know, and of course, hosting the Olympics was just a huge source of national pride and excitement. So, and the timing was perfect because I graduated my undergrad in 1999 and the Olympics were 2000. So I moved over to Sydney early 2000 and quickly found that being one of 4 people on the music department of the opening and closing ceremonies for the Olympics was so much work and was so scary. I mean, I was still like 21. I didn't have any experience doing this. And you talk to Max and he's like, well, I didn't have any experience running the Olympics either. Like no one knew, the scale was so massive. And Max had handpicked his 2 other colleagues to be in the music department. And then I was the 4th. And it was, looking back, I'm like, that's kind of crazy. Why did you only have 3 people plus me as the volunteer? Well, he quickly realized that it was a much bigger job and ended up hiring me. So I became the 4th staff member. And it really was like putting on a massive review that everyone in the entire world was going to watch. And in a stadium for, I don't know how many 100,000 people. And it was about a 6-month, I'd say, preparation period. You know, it's weird. I look back, and for some reason, they gave me the job of securing the rights for some of the music to be used in the ceremony. Again, I was 21. Like, email had barely been invented. So I'm like trying to figure out who to email in America to get the rights to Love Is in the Air so that they could play it for the closing ceremony. Like, I don't even know what I probably just write, hey, so I'm writing from the Olympics. Can we use your song? It'd be like, sure, let's send over some legal documents. So, you know, a lot of it was just winging it. And I do remember calling my mom one day, and I think I was in tears or almost in tears. I'm like, I'm just so overwhelmed. Like, I don't know. There are so many people calling in every day. And I mean, we had a 2,000 person marching band. That was just one of the 30 acts that we had to rehearse and prepare for. I mean, it was I could talk for the whole 90 minutes just about the Olympics, but it was, to get back to your question, it was like putting on a giant review, because there were so many people involved in these separate acts, but it had to add up to this, obviously, this whole culmination of celebrating Australia and celebrating international sports and camaraderie. So that was the goal, but there were just so many puzzle pieces to get to that. It was very, very layered. Again, I can go into it more, or we can move on. It was the Olympics. I mean, it really was the Olympics.
Well, if we have time, we'll come back to that. But I'm super interested how you ended up in the United States.
Okay, so I actually think it was before I moved over to Sydney. Yes, it was. So while I was still studying at WAPA, I was in my final year, I saw a poster up on the call board, on the notice board, for a Fulbright scholarship. And I think the headline was, "Do you want to study in America?" I was like, yep. So, you know, went away and submitted the forms, or got the application sent to me. And I put together an application for a Fulbright scholarship, and I was very fortunate to be awarded it. And I had proposed to study at Arizona State, which was one of only 2 schools at the time where you could study for a master's degree in music direction. So I got the Fulbright scholarship. I didn't start until January 2001. I actually moved to America on 01/01/01. So it's always easy to remember how long I've been here. And I then spent a semester at Arizona State. I did not spend the full 2 years there, because after my first semester, or during my first semester, I spent a little bit of time in New York. So I kept popping over to see shows, and I think I played a couple of Don't Tell Mama gigs. I thought, why am I in Arizona? Why am I not in New York? My scholarship's only for 2 years, and then I'm going to have to go back to Australia. So I poked around a little bit, and the internet was, you know, sort of booming. And I found the music theater writing program at NYU. So I sent in an application for the following fall semester, fall 2001. And I was accepted, and it all happened very quickly. I planned to spend 2 years in Arizona, but in May of 2001, I decided that I would then switch over to New York, and then start a different master's degree in New York City.
So let me get this straight. So in August of 2001, you came to New York City.
Yeah.
And 1 month
on
later.
my birthday. Yeah. I moved to New York. Well, I was at Quisisana, where I met you, Rob Meff.
Yes.
The summer of 2001.
I remember it well.
I was there with Amy Rogers. And then we left Quisisana together, and I think it was my birthday, which was August 27th, so the very end of August 2001, drove down to New York City and started class the first week of September 2001.
Right. And then 9/11 happened.
And 9/11 happened my second week of classes. Yeah.
And what was that like?
I mean, it was so surreal. It was so surreal because I had very little knowledge of life in New York prior to that. And people always say that really changed the city. And of course, I'd visited a few times. I'd not really lived there. Yeah, it was so surreal because you never imagine that something like that will ever happen. And it was scary, and you know, we were downtown. I mean, we weren't right in the heart of where it all was happening, but we were still close. And I had friends who lost relatives, and you know, it's obviously a really traumatic time, and really confusing and upsetting. Not knowing when New York would go back to normal, or when the world would go back to normal, honestly. But I never thought of leaving. I don't know. It actually never occurred to me to leave. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. But I lived up in Inwood at the time, which is the very northern tip of Manhattan. And so I think feeling like semi-removed from ground zero probably was helpful. It just felt like it was a whole other, we're in a whole other neighborhood up there. And I had a lot of friends up in that neighborhood too, who'd been to Quisissan, and we were all very close from the summer. And people who were in the Arizona State community living up there. But it was also weird because I'm so thankful I had that community, because the day of 9/11, I remember being with all my classmates, but we'd known each other for a week. So it's not like, you know, we all were really hugging each other and crying and like, you know, obviously we were all helping each other out, but these people were essentially strangers. It was an odd way to mark the beginning of my 2-year degree, my life in New York, honestly. It was the beginning of my life in New York.
Well, so you had a lot of really wonderful teachers there. But when you were at NYU, you started working off Broadway as a conductor and arranger and keyboard player. And you kind of broke on the professional scene working on Spelling Bee. And can you tell me the relationship between your MFA at NYU and Spelling Bee? How did that happen?
Yeah, so again, this is the life lesson that I always go back to, and that you need to ask for what you want. And I still to this day think of, I remember walking into a class that William Finn was co-teaching. He was not on faculty at that time, although he is now, but he was a guest teacher that day, and I obviously was a huge fan of his work. And at the end of the class, I just went up and I said, look, if you ever need an assistant for anything, I can transcribe, I can arrange, I can get you coffee. I'd love to be around. Basically the same thing that I'd said to Max Lambert, which landed me the job at the Olympics. And lo and behold, he called me a few days later, or maybe a week later, and said, I have a song that I need help notating. Can you do it? And I said, 100% sure. So went up to his apartment and took a recording of him singing, playing, and went home, and I did it. I stayed up all night to get it done. And then I called him at 9 o'clock the next morning and said, I'm done. And he was like, wait, what? I think he probably thought it was going to take a week or so. And he asked me to do another one, and then another one. And I mean, besides me working really hard for him and wanting to do a good job, we also just clicked. We made each other laugh, and I think he appreciated my Australianness. I think I was probably a bit exotic or something. And he at that time was working on a show called Elegies, which was a song cycle that ended up being produced off-Broadway at Lincoln Center. And because I was there helping him, just get all of his stuff ready for those rehearsals, I ended up being the associate music director for that. And that went really well. Our relationship was solid, and he then one day said, "Oh, I've been asked to write this show about kids at a spelling bee. Come listen to some songs and help me notate them." And I was listening to one of the first songs that he played. He said, "Okay, it also has to be for 9 different people to sing. It's, 6 kids and 3 adults, or 6, characters, 3 child characters, 3 adult characters, but 9 people singing all together." So, he said, "Just do some harmonies." I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't even know what vocal arranging was at that point. I'd never even thought about what went into vocal arranging. But I'm like, "Oh, okay, guess I know. I'm a composer. I mean, I just did 2 years of studying musical theater composition. Like, I can do some harmonies." And it just so happened that was the beginning of me doing vocal arrangements for Spelling Bee. Again, because I just kept churning out the work pretty quickly, and Bill was writing very quickly. That show for him, he will always say, it was the easiest to write. It just came out of him very organically. And so we had this, we had a blast, like writing. He was writing the show and I was helping arrange it. And I again feel very fortunate that I was in a room with William Finn, and I was brave enough and I had the guts. I don't even know if I would do that now, honestly, but I was in my early 20s. I was like, why not? Like, it's a win-win. I can help him, and hopefully he can help me. But I would like to say, at this moment, when we're talking about being at NYU and getting started on Broadway, that Rob Meff, you gave me my first Broadway job, which I will always be thankful for. Rob Meff asked me to sub for him on Les Mis. I mean, you barely knew me. You totally took a chance, and that was such a generous thing to do. And I don't think I sucked too badly. But it was terrifying. Subbing is terrifying, but I'll always be grateful to you for that opportunity. It's a big deal.
Well,
big deal.
Well, thank you. It was among the many decisions of my life, one of the easiest, because you are an extraordinary person, and I knew you could do it. And
thank you.
And you were fantastic. You were totally great.
You opened that door, and speaking of being a good mentor, which you were a great mentor to me. You opened that door, and often that's the one thing that a good mentor will do that will then change the course of a person's life, and it did. I'm so grateful.
Oh, that's very kind. This is not about me. Let's go. I'm very uncomfortable.
That's why we're here.
So I'm going to turn it back to you again. Well, it was actually a wonderful thing to be able to provide that. Les Mis lasted so long, and I conducted so much, and I always needed people who were really reliable and wonderful, and you were just that in spades. So that was great.
Oh, thank you.
I wanted to unpack William Finn a little bit for a second.
All right.
Not everyone knows. I mean, you and I talk in a bit of a shorthand here because we both know Bill. But we've been talking with a lot of composers, right? So on Wednesday we talked with Tom Kitt. Last week we talked with Stephen Schwartz. We talked with Andrew Lippa. And Bill Finn has a different, let's just say massively different writing process than those people, because both Stephen and Andrew and Tom are highly trained, like educated musicians, right? It's certainly in specifically in the art of notation. And what Bill was asking you to do, you kept saying it, was notate his songs, to lift it or transcribe his songs.
Yeah.
And I think that I want you to explain to everyone why he didn't do it himself, for one, why he needed you to do that, and how vital it was that you were doing this. And I have a follow-up to it, but I'll have you answer that.
Mm-hmm. So, Bill, I mean, there are many composers who work this way, but the ones you mentioned that you've spoken to are, I mean, Tom Kitt is, he can go notate something in 2 seconds. It's just it's a tool in a composer's tool belt that either they have and they want to use because it's the fastest way to do it, or it's faster for someone else to do it. So in Bill's case, he has his whole career asked other people to help him actually physically write the notes on the page, what he's writing. So he's writing every note. He knows what chords he's playing. He plays piano really, really well. He sings everything, but he needs to get that transcribed onto stuff, into sheet music. And so that is something that I had done with Max Lambert. And so I'd always, I have perfect pitch, which is at this point in my life a little wonky. It's a little less than perfect pitch right now. But at that time, I'd done my undergrad with, music theory classes every other day. So my ear was really strong and I could do it very quickly. So it was just one of those special skills that just came in very, very handy.
It's true. So my follow-up to that is that, notation is the way a composer tells someone who doesn't know them how to do their song, like what pitch to sing, how long to hold it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's kind of obvious. So when someone picks up a piece of music by Bill Finn, how important is it that they stick exactly to what is precisely notated on the page? Is there some kind of leeway that people have?
That's a good question.
See, my
question. Wow.
Well, my father always taught me.
Interpretation class.
Well, my father always taught me, never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. But anyways, go ahead. I want to hear it from you.
Look, I may give you a different answer than many other people. And I would give you a different answer about my own music too. Sure. Well, can I start with actually the difference between me and Bill Finn? When I am so specific with every rhythm and every note that when I play and sing something as I'm writing it, I will do it exactly the same every single time. With someone like Bill, he doesn't do it the same every single time. So it would be part of my job to figure out which version. Like he would often sing me, My Friend the Dictionary, like 6 different ways. And I'm not talking about different songs, obviously, but the melody might go up at the end of a phrase instead of down, or he would choose a different pickup. And that's totally normal. So many composers do that. And I mean, I guess I'm sort of more the rigid the composer, but I would need to check in with him and see, okay, now do you want this version where the melody goes, oh, or do you want this pickup? So look, for the most part, it's always safest to sing what's on the page because that doesn't come out of nowhere, right? It's still organic, it's coming from the composer. But you can, there are things that are open to interpretation. Now, I'm not going to say change notes and melodies, but you will often hear, or notes and rhythms. But if you listen to Bill Finn singing his own material at Joe's Pub, the album called Infinite Joy, I'm sure he's not singing the exact notes that are written down, that Norm Lewis and then Liz Calloway also sing, and then Betty Buckley sang in Elegies. Look, I think the answer is the sheet music should be your guide, but research the composer that you're singing, right? And if you know that on every recording that you hear of, say, Carmel Dean's music, it's always in exactly the same way, which is the way that it's written down, then that's probably how I want it to be performed. If it's someone like Bill Finn and you've heard some different variations, and you may even see different versions of songs floating around. Like I've seen probably 4 different copies of Anytime floating around. So, look, I think always start with what's on the page. If you have a good reason for adding melisma or for if you can justify a small change, then I think that's fine too.
So yes, so you had the opportunity to work.
Are you about to boot me off this call?
No, no, this is completely, I mean, it's exactly, it's such amazing information. And to hear it from someone who was sitting by Bill Finn's piano as he created this stuff. And it's really why I think it's so important to understand the process of a composer, because every composer has a different process.
Everyone's so different. Yeah.
But what we get as interpreters of the music all looks the same. Like, it's a piece of music, it has black dots on it with lines. So we need guidance about how to interpret this material from the people who are there. And that's why I'm so grateful for you sharing this stuff. You know, I forget who said it, but someone was quoting Edward Albee when he was doing some kind of collaboration. And Edward Albee said, "There's only one playwright. All of the rest of you are interpreters."
Yeah.
And I think that's good advice. So, but anyways, I want to pivot just to smell, and I sort of ask you the same question. So you had an opportunity to work with Tom Kitt, of course, who was just here on Wednesday. And and when I mentioned that you were here on Friday, he just was so excited that our listeners are going to hear from you. So you worked with him on American Idiot and maybe more, but what was that collaboration, right? Like, he is someone who notates his music, right? So
yeah. So I use Tom Kitt as an example of a dream composer for a music director, because you literally walk into rehearsal and it's there and you know exactly what he wants. He has notated it all, because he is a music director as well and an orchestrator and arranger. He does half of your job for you. So, I mean, that's a rare case, and composers don't have to know all those things, although that surely helps. You know, and that's no comment on composers who don't wear all those hats, but you know, I've been on both sides of the table where I will get a lead sheet with like scratchy chords and a melody that I can't quite make out, or I'll get a voice memo that I have to then, you know, write out and decipher. No, Tom Kitt is just fantastic and has this wealth of experience and is a kind person and a very, very joyous collaborations that we've had. Yeah, American Idiot was the first. It was a workshop that we did probably 2008, where he asked me to be his associate music director. At the time, he was going to music direct, and it was the Untitled Punk project, and it was using the music of Green Day and the album American Idiot. And we were, it was probably 12 singers at that point, and we wanted to teach these 12 singers Tom Kitt's arrangements and have a rhythm section. And I think we also had some strings at that point, and do a presentation of Tom Kitt's arrangements for Green Day. And Tom Kitt ended up basically having me teach everything and be at the piano and then conduct the band. And at a certain point I was like, Tom, this was actually kind of a hard conversation, because I'm like, I feel like I'm music directing this. I just want to, like, is that okay? Like, do you want me to be doing that? You know, like, because I know you asked me to be your associate, but I'm like giving notes, and because he was over, you know, talking to Michael Mayer and Stephen Hoggett, and he was like, you're absolutely right. He's like, you are music directing this. Going forward, we will make sure that, you know, your title is clear and that your job description is music director. You know, he's a generous person and a brilliant musician, and that, you know, 2 years later ended up being my music direction debut on Broadway. And it was, like I said, just joyous, because he has this wealth of knowledge and wealth of musical styles. I mean, he grew up playing in rock bands and playing like piano bars and playing classical, and taught me so much about contemporary music, actually, and about rock and roll. And because, you know, like I said earlier, I'm a classical music nerd. So I learned so much from being in the room with Tom Kitt.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's great. So you were the, so you said you were the music director for If Then as well, which is another
Yes.
toolkit project, but you were the music supervisor for the national tour. And can you explain to our audience what the difference between the two is? What's your role as a music director, and how does that change when you're the supervisor?
Such a great question. And I find myself answering this question a lot, basically every time I get asked to do a job, because I think it changes depending on the show, changes a little bit, depending on the show and depending on the composer of the show. So a music supervisor for a tour is, that's a pretty defined role. Like, you are supervising something that already exists. So my job basically was just to oversee it. And I ended up, I also conducted the first 3 months of that tour, but then I left the tour, and I would fly out every so often, like probably once a month or so, to check on it. And I would sit in the back of the house, and you just want to make sure people are still sounding good and people are healthy, people haven't changed notes and changed rhythms. And you obviously want to keep people, you can't stifle creativity, but at the same time, a show is a machine, and there has to be a very high level of consistency. So you're just checking in, and it's actually helpful to step away for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You don't want it to go, too long before, between seeing shows. But it helps to have that fresh perspective coming back. Whereas if you're conducting every night, you're in it. So a supervisor for a tour is very much about keeping a show in shape and keeping the consistency there, and keeping the original integrity of the production there from a musical standpoint. Music supervisor on a brand new show, I don't know if you want me to get into that, because that's
Sure.
something I'm doing now. So I'm supervising The Notebook. Ingrid Michaelson is writing the music, and she's brilliant. And she is writing the most beautiful score.
And
oh
difficult.
my God, you guys just wait. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And she's a dream to collaborate with. But she is someone who hasn't written for theater before and hasn't really worked as a creative in the theater before. Turns out she's a natural, she's fantastic. But someone like me, as a supervisor, I've been working in the biz almost for 20 years. I'm also a composer as well as a music director. So I can just be there as a sounding board for her. I'm also wearing the hat of arranger, and I will be co-orchestrating and co-vocal arranging with her. Now, she's someone who composes in layers. So she's vocal arranging her own stuff as she writes it, which is fantastic. And, what I do when I'm wearing these other hats as arranger and all the other things, is basically still collaborate with her, and find ways to theatricalize the music. So she's a pop songwriter. I'm finding ways to blow open these pop songs, to work with the story, to intersperse dialogue, maybe add a key change. She writes everything in her own voice, so they're all in female keys. I will often need to pick keys for male characters, but if it's a duet, then figure out how to invert certain voicings, that kind of thing. So that's definitely more the creative side of supervising, which sort of blurs into the world of arranging as well. But I supervised Hands on a Hard Body as well, and that was a project that Trey Anastasio wrote, and he was coming from the rock world. It was a similar kind of thing. You're sort of just there as a consultant to as the theater world musical consultant to people who are not coming from the same background.
There's so much to unpack there.
I know, I know.
I wanted to ask you about when you said Ingrid Michaelson writes in layers, and I think I know what you're saying is because I've worked with people like this. They are people that don't necessarily write vertically when they're writing vocal arrangements. That they will actually sing a part and then they'll sing all the different parts, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Independently.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to imagine the
No,
brilliance of that.
so beautiful. So her stuff's so beautiful, and she has this gorgeous voice. So, and, you know, she does just like record stuff into GarageBand, and just, it sounds incredible. It's just her singing.
Right.
She writes very basic piano parts, which are her signature sound. I mean, she writes these beautiful songs, but she uses a lot of open fourths, open fifths, you know, single bass notes, and then just creates the magic layers above that with her voice. She's very gifted, and she's writing beautifully theatrical songs, and she writes so quickly.
Really?
Yeah, we'll be on a lunch break in a reading, and she'll go off and write something, come back, and then we teach it that afternoon. I mean, she's just, I can't wait for the world to hear this score.
Well,
Yeah,
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Well, this is something else I want to unpack about what you were talking about. So, among your amazing musical skills, which, you know, they're paramount, one of your great strengths is actually communication. And the way that you describe the relationship between a music supervisor, a consultant, a music director, really has a lot to do with communication.
Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
And so you're constantly asked to give feedback, right? To give notes, things like that. So what makes constructive feedback? Like how do you, what's the magic in saying something that people are going to listen to?
Look, I think that I think I've probably learned to communicate differently since I've been putting my own compositions into the world. Although I'd like to think that I've always communicated with kindness and with empathy anyway. But look, when you birth a song, it literally feels like you're giving birth, and it's like you're giving up a part of yourself to the world. Excuse me. So whether I'm giving feedback to a composer, or if I'm in a masterclass working with an actor or with a piano student, it's really important to start with positives, find the thing that's working and the thing that find a strength, because we all need to hear that. Like you can't take for granted that someone knows that their piece is good, that they have a great key change, that the hook is fantastic, that their money note is fantastic. Like I always want to reinforce the positivity, and I will never, at least I try not to be prescriptive. If I will always suggest something, and if you're with a great collaborator, they'll be open to suggestions. It's actually a conversation that I had with Ingrid really early on. I think maybe in our first meeting when she was deciding if she wanted to work with me, or maybe it was the meeting after that. I said, look, how do you want us to do this? Because you know how to write songs. Like, I'm not going to come in and tell you how to write songs. You also know how to write piano accompaniments. But I also am here with my toolkit. And I don't want to tread on your toes, but I would just want to help you. So how do I do that? What's the best method of communication? Do you want me to play stuff down and send it back to you and you can listen to it? Or do you want me to, just give you a suggestion of, say, like, what about that melody going up a fourth so it soars more before, stuff like that. Although that does sound prescriptive, and maybe, I don't know how often I would do that, but it's about clear communication and kindness in communication.
That's amazing. I want to talk about your composing for a moment before we go on to the Vivo Questionnaire. So I want to talk about a Renaissance.
Yes.
which has been super duper successful. And those about you, you can get this online. The recording is really quite extraordinary. It's based on the poetry of Edna St. Vincent Millay. So what drew you to that source material?
So what's funny is people think I'm this poetry buff because I wrote a show about a poet. Actually, I'm not a poetry buff at all. Dirty little secret. Although obviously I love the poetry of Edna St. Vincent Millay. I discovered her in applying for the NYU Music Theatre Writing Program because they give you the poem of Millay's called Time Does Not Bring Relief to set to music. And so I set that to music, and I really connected to her writing. And over the years, I never had one writing partner that I was really drawn to, and I wasn't my own lyricist at that point. And so every time I wanted to write a song, I would open my volume of Edna St. Vincent Millay poems, and I'd look for something that spoke to whatever emotional state I was in, and also looked for something that looked relatively easy to set. Like, was there a clear structure to it? It wasn't 17 pages long, although ironically Renaissance is like 210 lines long, but I didn't write that till the very, very end when I knew I was writing a musical. So I ended up just writing this collection of songs that I thought would be a song cycle, and it took me years and years because I wasn't really thinking of it as a collection until I had the collection. And then Dick Scanlon, who's a brilliant book writer, and someone that I worked with on Everyday Rapture at Second Stage in New York. We were having lunch, and he asked to hear some of my own music because most people didn't know me as a composer, and I guess I'd mentioned it to him. So I had a CD, and I gave him my songs, and he tells sort of this famous story where he said his inner monologue was like, "Oh God, not poetry songs." He like did an inner eye roll. But I, lo and behold, he listened, and he said, "I think I can figure out the story around these songs." And that was before I had read Renaissance, the epic poem, and I didn't really know anything about that poem. But he did some research on Millay, extensive research, and decided that her writing of that epic poem would be the thing to tie all of these other poems together. And the story of how she wrote that poem and how she thought it was going to catapult her to stardom by winning a contest, and actually she didn't win the contest, but she became famous for not winning the contest. So just spoke to me as a writer and as a young woman trying to stand out as an artist. So that's how Renaissance came to be.
That's amazing. Before we go to the Vivo Questionnaire, I was wondering if you had any thoughts for our audience here. Most of them are musical theater students, some musical theater educators, all people who are passionate about theater. Just thoughts about sustaining a creative life. Any advice?
You cut out for 2 seconds, sorry.
I'm sorry, my question was about any thoughts about how to sustain a creative life.
Ooh, the $1 million question, right? I think it's about keeping your eyes and ears open to whatever, whoever, whether it's nature, whether it's going to other shows, whether it's reading a book, whether it's listening to other music. Whenever I'm stuck, I realize that, oh, well, I haven't listened to any music for a few days, so no wonder I can't find any music. No wonder I'm playing the same 3 chords that I keep going to. I haven't opened up my mind for a few days. I try to go running. I mean, I'm not definitely not a religious runner, but going running is so good for my creativity. It's just something that gets unlocked. It's that sort of mindless thing where suddenly the creative juices will flow. And honestly, for me, it's also connecting with other artists and especially other writers, and just either commiserating with each other or inspiring each other or sharing stories, or just knowing that the creative process is a process and it's different for everyone, and that this is my ironic answer, is that there's no right answer. Everyone finds it hard at times. Everyone finds it torturous at times, and finds it ecstatic at times. But I have to remind myself to keep my eyes and ears open.
I love that. That's amazing. What a wonderful way to wrap that up. So I want to continue to the next section here, which is the Vivo Questionnaire. These 10 questions originally came up from a French television series called Bouillon de Culture, hosted by Bernard Pivot. They're better known as the questions that James Lipton used to ask his guests at the end of every Inside the Actors television show. So there are 10 questions. The first question is, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word?
Yes.
Passion.
Nice. What is your least favorite word?
Poop. I haven't thought about these. This is like,
I love the candid answers,
Yeah. Should I have looked at these first?
No, this is much better.
I wouldn't have said poop.
Yeah, Tom Kitt spent a month doing his answers, which shouldn't surprise anybody, but here we go. Number 3 is, what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Oh, great music.
What turns you off?
Unimaginative music.
So what is your favorite curse word?
The F word.
Listen, your parents are not listening, so you can say it.
Fuck! Does this thing get bleeped?
Yeah, you won't get in any trouble here, I promise. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, I love babies laughing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
It feels weird to say in the time of Corona, but like people with gross coughs, which I would hear a lot when I was conducting If Then.
Right.
People like clear their throats a lot. Oh, gross.
Stay home.
Googly cough. Yeah.
So what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Photography.
What profession would you not like to do?
Garbage pickup.
And the 10th question is, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, finally, we'll have some fun.
I love that. Thank you so much. So we're going to turn to questions from our audience here. So those of you listening, if you have any questions, just type them into the question and answer function on Zoom. We will start with Andrew Esker. He says, hi, Carmel, big fan. I actually got to meet you in San Francisco at the stage door during the tour of If Then a few years back. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
Thanks, Andrew.
So regarding your comment about aspiring music directors not being equipped to do the job at the beginning of their careers, like you, I got into theater late, but exclusively through working in the pit. From my limited experience as an MD, I've observed, and you've discussed today, that it's a role where we have to be a jack of all trades for the entire music department. Can you talk a little more about your approach to learning new aspects of the job when you were tasked with something you didn't yet have experience with? Love that question.
Such a great question. Such a great question. And I feel like it's literally happened to me on basically every show I've done. It's like, oh, I also have to know how to do that.
Ableton.
Yeah, keyboard programming, vocal arranging. But I think being aware of it, which Andrew is like, that's the key, right? Just knowing that there are going to be things that you can't go into it knowing everything. Like, I feel like every time I music direct a show, I'm getting another master's degree. Luckily, I'm being paid for it this time. Look, I think we're in look, we are, especially right now in this time of great access to different learning platforms. There are so many classes available online, courses, paid or free. There are YouTube videos for things. For this, we did a notebook workshop last week, and we did it all over Zoom, which meant that I had to create tracks on Logic, which I didn't really know how to, or I could do sort of a very limited version, but I had to brush up my skills on that. And, I've music directed a lot of shows, and I still didn't really know how to do that. So there's always going to be something. Ask around. It's so easy to find. I mean, relatively easy to find someone who knows the thing that you need to know, and either you can barter your own skills. And I've done that, actually. I've had friends help me with some technological stuff, like setting up a mic for my home studio. I've bartered their skill for my skill on that. There's a lot available. So just dig around. Yeah, and don't beat yourself up that you don't know everything, because I don't know everything. We none of us know everything, honestly.
Right. I mean, that is so very true for all of you listening. Like, and actually, it's interesting because it's one other thing that a lot of people have said consistently throughout this interview process: how many times they felt like a complete fraud.
Yeah. Oh my God. Just daily.
Right. Yeah. So Jeff Saver, I don't know, do you know Jeff?
But Jeff is great. Yeah.
He talked about John Kander, and John Kander would always say, it's only a matter of time until they figure me out.
Yeah. Just don't listen to that voice.
Right. So, but
listen to it if it's inspiring you to become better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the key point is that we all kind of feel that way. Like there's always a certain time that we don't know what we're doing, right, but we're always in the process of learning what it is, rather than giving up and saying,
say I'm not right for this. Yeah.
So, all right. So this is a question from one of my graduate students. This is Devon Hunt. He is also a classical pianist, yes, or was earlier, or still is, but he is a master's of piano performance. He asks, how do you feel like your classical training has influenced your musical theater composing? And are there any specific classical composers that have inspired you, specifically classical?
That's a great question. And I actually have thought about this a lot lately, or in regards to the score I wrote for Renaissance. I think because people knew me prior to Renaissance as the rock and roll music director, because I did American Idiot and I worked with Tom Kitt so much. I think people didn't realize that I had this classical background. And so my Renaissance score, I draw heavily on my classical roots. I think there are hints of Grieg in my piano parts and Rachmaninoff. I'm not at all saying that I'm anywhere near as good as these greats, but I Chopin. Oh, what happened?
Something happened?
What happened? Oh, I went away. You went away.
You're still there.
I'm still here?
I'm still here. I can see you.
Oh, great. Oh, someone was calling me.
Oh.
Sorry, okay. Chris Ricker, I'll call you back. Fauré, honestly, Gershwin too. I don't know if you put him in with the classical composers, but
many do.
Yeah. I'm definitely influenced. I think now, because I started writing that score 20 years ago, and my own not my musical tastes have changed, but my musical, I guess what I listen to has changed a lot. I've become much more familiar with rock and pop styles. I now gravitate a little more towards the contemporary genres when I'm writing, but the classical will always be there, always.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to this. When you're writing, how important is form like lyrical form, song form, story form?
I'm a Virgo, so I love form. Love structure. Love it. And yes, it's a very classical thing too, I think. When I'm writing my own lyrics, I have to see the different sections. That's what makes it fun, actually, as a writer too, is playing the word game aspect of it. I will always start with a very structured. Wait, can you see if I could pull up a lyric? I don't have anything, like, I'm next to my piano, but I always have like 8 lines, and then 6-line bridge, or whatever. I don't always stick to it, but it's how I like to organize my thoughts.
Interesting. I think it's so important to know about a composer's process, also how to interpret what to do. All right, there's 2 questions here. I'm going to put them together because they all have to do with being someone not from the United States. The first one is from Richard Morrison, also one of my graduate students, who says, what are the rewards and hardships of packing up your life and moving across the world to pursue your career and create a new life so far from home?
Oh.
And then a corollary to that question is from one of my former graduate students, Leo Chang, who says that he's an international artist as well. Leo's from Taiwan. And he wanted to know if you could share what was your biggest challenge in your career as an international artist, whether it's visa, finance, other issues, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, hi Leo. Both great.
Basically like the emotional thing of moving away, and then like the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. So look, I was 22 when I moved here, and nothing but blinders on, right? I was like, gotta get to America, gotta get to New York. Who are the rest of you? Bye. Now that was me. That was a young, ambitious 22-year-old me who just wanted to be in the heart of musical theater, and that's why I didn't leave after 9/11. I still had things to do. Like, I needed to be in New York. I still, 20 years later, get so homesick. It's something I never thought about. Didn't think I would be homesick. Honestly, I never even really thought about the future when I left, because I was young, and I think 22-year-olds don't really think that much about the future, or not, at least not in the way that I think about it now. My entire family is still in Australia. I have one cousin who I'm not that close to, but my dad's cousin who lives in America, who I went to meet my first trip to America. And he had left Australia when he was in his early 20s. And he said, "Can I give you one piece of advice?" I said, "Of course." And he said, "Keep your ties with your family and friends at home, and keep them as strong as you can." Never forget that. And I think that has just seeped in, and I feel like look, it's a double-edged sword, because I still feel very connected to, obviously, to my family, but to a lot of people in the industry in Australia. I have a lot of friends in the biz there. But that gets hard because I feel like I have one foot in 2 places often, or 2 feet in 2 different places, That's been the hardest thing, is I think a little bit of an identity crisis. Like, I'll always call myself Australian, and yet I've been here for 20 years, and in 2 years I will have been here for exactly half of my life, and then it'll be that I've been in America more than I ever lived in Australia. And I have American citizenship now. I have dual citizenship. I wouldn't have applied for American citizenship if it meant I had to give up my Australian citizenship, but I'm lucky in that I can have both. But it's still, it takes me a long time to adjust, even now, 20 years later, from visiting my family in Australia, coming back here to America, and vice versa. It's kind of like, wait, where am I? Who am I here? Who am I there? you know, it's all in my head. It's all just an emotional state. Like, you know, I'm just Carmel visiting, or Carmel coming back to America. I miss being so far away from my family, for sure. I miss that I just can't go see my parents for dinner once a month. My brother has a new baby who was born 2 weeks ago. I don't know when I can travel next. My parents are getting older. They're still healthy, but, you know, they won't be around forever. My sister has, I have a little niece and nephew. My sister has 2 kids, and I see them once or twice a year. So I make a very concerted effort to go home at least once a year. And that's an expense that I have to undertake because flying to Australia is not cheap. And it's also time consuming. It's like 27 hours of flight time. So I have to spend like 3 weeks there if I go there. It's not worth it otherwise. So yeah, that's a long answer, but there are just all of those things, you know, I think are relevant to those questions.
Right. What about the nuts and bolts of things? Was it a difficult process to get your green card, your citizenship?
I was lucky because I'd been working straight out of grad school. I was saving money, and I had the means to hire a great lawyer. It's a lot of work, a lot of paperwork to get I had O1 visas for many years, and then I switched to a green card, and then I applied for citizenship. So it's expensive if you're going through lawyers, but I also knew that I just wanted to do it the right way, and made sure I had a good lawyer. I also was fortunate in that I did it before this big immigration crisis that we're in the thick of. I think people applying for, well, hasn't Trump halted it like altogether as of a few days ago? Like we can't even apply for anything right now. But I think it was, for me, my citizenship came through just over 2 years ago, but I've had my green card for 10 years now, where I got it in 2010. So I'm lucky in that I was applying at a time where it wasn't quite as fraught politically. And I hope that at some point it's going to be easier for people to get their citizenship or their visas. But there are also a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of lawyers for artists. And I'm happy to give the name of my great immigration lawyer if anyone wants it. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And as we all know, immigrants get the job done.
100%.
100%. So I got one last question for you before we leave. This is from Maya Kato. And she asks whether you have a favorite inspirational composer, like who in musical theater writing now, or anytime actually, who really inspires you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to be the obvious, but the great Stephen Sondheim. Just, I mean, both lyrically and musically, always inspired. I mean, also he has a huge body of work, and covering so many stories and so many musical genres. And his lyric writing, there's no one greater. Rodgers and Hammerstein and Rodgers and Hart, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, the Gershwins, Adam Guettel, huge fan of Adam's writing. There are so many. I love Jason Robert Brown. I will often, if I'm stuck, I'll put on any of those composers and just be like, oh, okay, right. There are great songs out there. There must still be great songs to be written.
What about the next generation? Who do you see that's young right now that you really see a lot of promise in?
Well, I mean, obviously, Pasek and Paul, I don't know if they're the next generation. They're younger than me and they write fantastic songs, so I'll call them the next generation. I actually mentor this LaGuardia High School student who's a beautiful writer. I mean, I think she's maybe 15. Grace Grammans is her name. I love Shayna Taub, who is you know, she's on the scene already, obviously, and she's writing a lot of incredible stuff. Anna Jacobs, who is another Australian, and I went to school with her here in New York. Rona Siddiqui, fabulous composer. Julianne Wick-Davis, beautiful composer. All these people are sort of circling around having their productions, I mean, hopefully sooner rather than later, or they've already had 1 or 2 productions in New York or regionally. Who else? Well, there are so many. I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware of the website newmusicaltheatre.com and Contemporary Musical Theatre. We've all got our songs. We're all pushing our songs on those websites, and there's, you know, you'll find stuff that people haven't done before.
Right. Well, they are wonderful. Just if you haven't heard about them, people who are listening, so these 2 websites that really support the creation of new musical theater, and you can listen to audio versions. Many of them have video versions of people's songs, and you can purchase all of the sheet music there, and the money goes straight to the artist, and it's a really great resource, especially for those of you who are looking for maybe something other than, you know, gimme for your next audition, right?
Well, can I plug my new show, because it's up online? I've just uploaded everything.
That is a wonderful way to conclude. Please plug your show. How do people access your show?
Wellbehavedwomenmusical.com. I did this, my song cycle at Joe's Pub, which Rob mentioned, and it's a collection of songs for historic women figures, such as Harriet Tubman, Billie Jean King, Virginia Woolf, Frida Kahlo, Malala Yousafzai. They're all standalone songs. I got some amazing Broadway divas to sing them. So the videos are all up on the website, and you can also just Google them, or you go to YouTube. But yeah, please, I would love to get the songs out there. So if you guys are looking for brand new material for women, wellbehavedwomenmusical.com. Happy to sing.
Well-behaved women, of course, is the first part of a quote, right? So what is the second part?
Well-behaved women seldom make history. An ironic title.
I like it. I like it. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you were here. Virtual applause for.
Thanks for having me. It's so great to see you, Rob.
So glad you're here.
Thank you. Honestly, it's so great to talk to you, and just makes my heart happy.
Me too. Me too. The SDSU Studio Series returns on Monday, May 4th at 1 p.m. Pacific Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, with music director and Broadway's most amazing dance arranger, David Chase. The series continues on for one more episode on May 6th, where we'll feature Associate Director and performer David Perlow. See our website for details, sdsustudioseries.wordpress.com. Thank you so much for coming today.